Most people can agree that the Doom series is the magnum opus of id Software. Lauded for its fast-paced action and epic music, it's a game series that dominated the early to late 90s and became the poster child for mature gaming. It's a series that refused to die, and despite that small slip-up in the early 2000s, Doom came back even stronger with the 8th generation of consoles, with Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal. Now once again this year, Doom is looking to get back into the spotlight with Doom the Dark Ages. This medieval-esque prequel has got many old and new Doom fans excited, thanks to all the exciting new gameplay innovations. Though it will most definitely be the same classic Doom formula. Now you can use a shield that doubles up as a boomerang and fly on the back of a dragon. But this old-timey aesthetic reminded me of another id Software franchise that has been put on ice for a good few years now, and that franchise is Quake. Quake is the awkward middle child of id Software, not quite as popular as Doom, but a lot more relevant than Rage. Yep, that's a series I completely forgot existed.
Couldn't be any easier. What do you say?
From my point of view, it feels like Quake is unfairly treated, not just by gamers, but also by id themselves. Doom takes most of the credit for being an innovative game that helped pave the way for FPS shooters and insane multiplayer, and rightfully so. But the thing is, Doom is lauded for all of its natural beauty, whereas Quake is seen as nothing more than a franchise that built itself on insane arena multiplayer. There's no denying this is where Quake saw most of its success and notoriety come from, and it's no surprise as to why id Software decided to run with this. Quake 2 was the most popular multiplayer game of 1998, and though it still had a single-player mode, id Software went all in with Quake 3, making it 99% multiplayer, with the other 1% being cutscenes. Quake 4 was the last time a Quake game developed by id Software had a significant story mode, as the next Quake game to be released by them was Quake Champions. Trying to capture that magic that was once there in the mid-90s and early 2000s, Quake Champions saw a radical decline in players, because for a lot of people, a game with just multiplayer simply isn't enough anymore. This isn't 20 years ago, arena shooters aren't the banker these days. It feels like a lot of people, and id Software themselves, have completely forgotten what Quake is all about, and I'll admit it, I was unaware of Quake's game. I made a video ages ago talking about Quake 4, and I mentioned the first Quake, but only briefly. As a big Doom fan, I felt it was necessary to go back and give the first Quake its flowers, and not for its multiplayer, but for its breakthroughs, its gameplay, its atmosphere, and its soundtrack. It's crazy to think that a game series that is now solely lauded for its multiplayer had a very interesting development, and only really came together thanks to unforeseen circumstances. Quake started out as nothing more than a character in a D&D campaign amongst id Software employees, and John Romero saw potential with the character's concept, and over the years began ironing out the creases. John knew that a new IP like this needed a new engine, so his full vision could be realised, and in 1996, the world finally got their hands on what was supposed to be the successor to Doom. Funny how Doom has pretty much taken what Quake was supposed to have, with the latter fading into niche obscurity, while the other is still around today. But Quake deserves so much more. Quake deserves everything Doom got, even a shitty film adaptation starring The Rock. id Software may have forgotten what Quake started out as, but I haven't. I've been enlightened by this gothic/futuristic shooter, and this video explains why Quake deserves the Doom treatment. In this video, I will be using the remastered version of Quake for reference, so any Quake purists out there, please look away now. Like a typical 90s shooter, the story is short and sweet. I thought about calling it simple, but even after my first playthrough, I didn't quite understand what was happening. I got the gist of it. You know, I'm not that stupid. Army bloke goes to a futuristic base, finds a portal, goes through the portal, kills a bunch of nasty looking monsters, finds a gizmo, and repeats the process 3 more times. That's basically all you need to know in order to enjoy the game. FPS games like Quake and Doom come from a simpler time where video games for the most part weren't really used as an outlet for out-of-this-world storytelling. Most mainstream developers didn't really see the potential in making a complex narrative. It was just easier to make bright colours flash up on the screen. If only they could have seen earlier the truly amazing stories that were to come, all thanks to video games. In Quake we play as Ranger, a guy who kinda looks like Doom Guy, but isn't. See, they've both got different helmets. That makes them completely different characters. Just because they both go around slaying hordes of demons, are very vascular, and make weird grunting noises, doesn't mean they're the same character. Ranger is on a mission to destroy a powerful enemy, codenamed Quake, after the rest of his unit was killed or corrupted by the unseen enemy. Not much is known about the evil forces Ranger is fighting just yet, but as the game progresses, more is revealed about who is really behind the Quake codename. Slipgates play a huge part in the story. The government created these trans-dimensional devices to put an end to the attacks of Quake and its legions of demonic monsters. Unfortunately, Quake took control of these slipgates, using them to corrupt military forces within the bases they are held in. It's it's always the bloody government. And after fighting through each base, Ranger must then go through the slip gates and battle the demonic army of Quake across different dimensions, all with the same gloomy gothic art style. For the most part, this aspect of the story can be understood through the environment itself. Environmental storytelling plays a huge role in Quake, as it shows the progression of Ranger's gradual descent even deeper into this gothic nightmare, with locations becoming ever more disturbing and morbid, letting you know you're on the right track. A more fleshed out narrative for the first Quake would be a great first step for a potential reboot to make. Perhaps id Software could expand on the mission that led to so many military bases going to shit, leaving Ranger as the sole survivor. They could also greatly expand on Ranger as a character, maybe make him a talking character. That would really set him apart from Doom Guy, and plus they already gave him some speaking lines in Quake Champions.
When you've been here this long, nothing and everything makes sense.
Ew, that gave me the ick. Okay, never mind. Maybe just give him a favourite hobby like football or something. Though by today's standards, the visuals of Quake are simple in comparison to a lot of modern games. Back in day, Quake was a true marvel of its time. Quake was loved by players for its fully 3D rendered environments. Gone were the days of fighting sprites and walking through 2D environments made to look 3D. Now players could be fully immersed in the dread-inducing world, or rather worlds, of Quake. I hate to keep banging on about Doom in a Quake video, but it really is interesting to see how different stylistically the two games are. Even without taking the graphical leap into consideration, the two couldn't be further from each other in terms of how they look. Doom's creatures and environments are very much in your face. There's a lot of pinks, greens, a few browns, and lots of blues that make the forces of hell very eye-catching, and this choice has stayed pretty consistent throughout the series, apart from when it got a bit edgy in the early 2000s. Quake, on the other hand, remains consistently dark throughout the game. Many settings and locations have a more grounded look to them, using darker colours to create a more disturbing atmosphere. Even the levels with futuristic designs look more uniform than the ones in Doom. This isn't to say that the level designs are dull, far from it. Quake has some of the most unique looking levels by id Software standards, and it's thanks to this creepy, almost realistic appearance to them. The visual style of Quake was inspired by gothic and medieval fiction, with locations consisting of castles, dungeons, torture chambers, and graveyards. The designs of the monsters, although perhaps not as iconic as Doom, continue the gothic style, with ghost-like entities, zombies, undead knights but bigger, ogres with chainsaws, and big bastards who can throw lightning at you. Whereas many of the Doom monsters look too out of this world to even imagine them existing in real life, there's something very real about many of the creatures in Quake. Many of them look fairly humanoid in nature, and the ones that don't look like Lovecraftian nightmare fuel. The fact that they are all fully rendered enemies, instead of what are essentially moving images, makes them feel all the more imposing too. Their true size and ferocity is on full display thanks to the Quake engine, and it makes Quake all the more terrifying in the process. Now imagine how twisted and scary the game would be with the same graphical leap of Doom Eternal. A Quake game that looks this good would be a dream come true for both FPS fans and horror shooter fans alike. Seeing these twats fly around in 4K would be nightmare fuel, but that's not me underestimating the original game. Quake is a pretty freaky experience, even all these years later. While id Software are the goats at making you feel, Quake puts the seeds of doubt in the back of your mind with its foreboding scenery and disturbing creatures. An interesting note about the level design is that there were 4 different people working on the levels who were all encouraged to do their own thing. Despite a whole squad of level designers working on the game, their designs feel coherent, and this pool of different ideas gives the single player a lot of variety, which you really need for a game that's short and has the same kind of gameplay style throughout. Just think of how intense a reboot could make these places look. So much more detail could be put into the decor of these eerie castles and cesspits, giving us some truly gothic works of art. Without fail, no matter which Doom game you play, its gameplay will always be heightened by its respected soundtrack. Doom's soundtracks make you feel like a brick shithouse, someone your enemies don't want to mess with, and while yeah, Doom 3 once again went against the grain by making the music a lot more horror themed, 99% of the time in a Doom game, the music is there to hype you up. The soundtrack of Quake works very differently. It's very deceptive with how the music introduces itself. The first track of the game is brilliant at dragging you into the world of Quake. It has a low, droning sound that creates a sense of mystery. You may ask yourself, where am I? Who are these guys? What the fuck is this thing? Though a solid opening track, it leaves you wanting more, like there's something missing from it. And once you reach your first slipgate, you're greeted with a more traditional id Software track, something that makes you feel accomplished. Then almost immediately after feeling like you've got a grasp of Quake and its themes, you enter the other dimension. And the whole vibe of the soundtrack changes. Much like the levels and the scenery of the game, the soundtrack is there to create a foreboding atmosphere. Many of the tracks in the game create an instant and everlasting sense of dread. Instead of blaring out of Ranger's AirPods, the music is very subtle and echoey, almost sounding organic. These tracks make the enemies you fight feel dangerous and something to be avoided. Whereas Doom encourages you to be fast and go immediately for the kill, the soundtrack of Quake is there almost as a reminder looming over your head, telling you that you aren't Doom guy, you will be punished for any mistakes. Now, this isn't id Software game after all, so obviously there are going to be some tracks that get you ready for a fight. The title theme is probably the standout track for a lot of people in the game. This theme plays on the title screen, obviously, as well as when you do something of importance in the story, like find a rune or defeat a boss. Whereas many of the other tracks are echoey and immersive, this one gets right to the point, blaring out a blend of electronic badassery, all the while an almost pained scream roars from behind it. The music is so masterfully done, and there's no surprise considering Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails was the man behind the music. Oh, that's cute, they put the Nine Inch Nails logo on the nails. This leads on to my next point. If Quake was given the Doom treatment, and the green light was given for a Quake soft reboot, / remake / whatever, I'll take anything at this point, then there's no way you can pull it off without getting Trent back to do the score. And as luck would have it, he still clearly loves making soundtracks for games. He's had so much experience since he did this in the 90s. Just look at his face, he's clearly gagging for it. One element of Quake you wouldn't need to chop and change all that much is the gameplay. There's a reason people still go on about how good early id Software games like Doom and Quake are. It's because their core gameplay loop with shooting baddies is so easy to get into and never gets old. Though this is Quake in its simplest form, it's so much more than this. It has to be, otherwise it wouldn't be regarded as one of the most influential games of all time. Players move through each level finding keys to open doors and enemies to kill, all the while running around looking for that elusive exit. Matches up almost identically to Doom, right? While there's one big deviation. Once again, the Quake engine comes in clutch as it allows the player to perform vertical aiming. Whereas bullets would gravitate towards an enemy in Doom as long as you were aiming in the general direction of it, Quake gives the player a lot more freedom when aiming and traversing the game, allowing you to aim where you want and also jump. Innovations like this allow Quake's gameplay to be a lot slicker. Enemy placement could now be more random and tactical from id Software because the player now has the means to fight back more efficiently, but this also means there's less room for error and more consequences for your actions if you're caught being reckless or careless. Like a pent-up dominatrix, punishment is a big aspect of Quake's gameplay too. While you can enjoy yourself killing monsters and finding fun little secrets, the game is waiting for you to make a wrong move. Just one small mistake and bang, back to the beginning of the level for you, buddy. But let's start with the basics. Ranger has a variety of weapons to help him on his quest to rid each dimension of gothic baddies. Not that kind, the other kind. Weapons come in all shapes and sizes and attempt to branch away from Doom's established weapon roster. Now, although there's a shotgun in Quake just like in Doom, in Quake, the shotgun sucks ass. It's a solid starting weapon, but don't hold your breath waiting for it to bail you out of a fight with a more powerful enemy. Quake introduces weapons that align with the cross-dimensional nature of the game. Ranger uses weapons that almost seem outdated when compared to the future side of Quake. The enemies have laser guns, while all you seem to have are nail guns and shitty shotguns, but looks can be deceiving. Though your weapons are there to get the job done, some work better in certain situations than others, and all of them have their own advantages and disadvantages. The player has to take this into account when encountering different enemies, as using the wrong tool for the job often leads to your head coming off. Take the grenade launcher for example. This weapon really shows off Quake's new engine, as the physics of the game make it a multi-purpose tool. Thanks to Quake no longer using sprites and allowing for more accurate aiming, the player can take advantage of this by bouncing grenades off of walls in certain ways to hit different targets. This allows you to both kill enemies around corners, making their attacks null and void, as well as letting you accurately attack enemies who are high up all by yourself, without the game holding your hand. Both launchers can also be used to kill those pesky zombies, without the use of quad damage. Yeah, buffs are back, which I'll get into later, don't worry. Once again, you have to be careful when using the launcher, as a stray nade could ping back at you and turn you into Ranger chunks. The nail gun is another iconic weapon of Quake. The nail gun and super nail gun act as the automatic weapons in your arsenal, and both are all-round great weapons. They can pretty much cut through anything. The only major issue with them is that they burn through ammo so quickly, and ammo drops are really low for these guns on each level. Also, the nails are projectiles, but this isn't a problem if you've got god-tier aiming like myself. The Thunderbolt is another unique weapon introduced in Quake, and one that sticks out for its destructive capability. Though it's another weapon that pisses through ammo, if you're a smart fella, you always keep some handy in case a shambler comes running at you. id Software decided to be smarty pants, as when you use the Thunderbolt in water, it will instantly electrocute you, which can be frustrating when fighting underwater and you accidentally switch weapons with that fucking mouse wheel. Doom allows you to kill enemies with your bare fists, but in Quake, you get a nice bloody axe to carve up enemies. You know, I always thought that was a shovel. Makes the idea of fighting an enemy with it all the more entertaining. Despite all of these exciting weapons, Quake isn't your typical run and gun game. As already mentioned, movement has been heavily overhauled, and danger can come from any direction. Unlike Doom Guy, who has the speed of someone rotating from A to B, Ranger is a little slower in comparison. This again points to the fact that Quake, while constantly action-packed, requires you to be more careful as you move slower and need to be more accurate with your weapons. It's not just enemies you need to watch out for, or a stray grenade either. The environments themselves are often littered with traps that range from simple trapdoors to death pits, and even to a slowly creeping spiked wall that crushes you to death. While it can be annoying at times to fall for one of these traps, it ties back in with the medieval-esque design of the game. How did these freaky bastards come up with such a contraption? The new movement also allowed id Software to let Ranger do things that Doom Guy just couldn't do, like parkour and swim. Despite Quake sounding really hard and a chore to play, it still has all of the fun little flourishes of an id Software game. Power-ups are once again available to find, and are arguably a lot more important this time around. The jump in difficulty from Doom to Quake is pretty big, and whereas perks like quad damage and invulnerability were fun for letting you go crazy in Doom, in Quake they feel necessary to your survival, as the odds are often overwhelming. Secrets also feel like a lifeline in Quake, with ammo for the nail gun and other weapons being so finite. It makes looking for secrets all the more rewarding when you stumble upon ammo crates, and no longer have to use the shitty shotguns. If Quake ever was going to make a return, they wouldn't need to mess with the core gameplay all that much. This is probably the element of the game that needs the least tweaking. New weapons seem like the safest bet for spicing up the gameplay, as the roster of guns feels rather small in comparison to Doom games. These weapons could encourage the player to tackle Quake in different ways. Another big way Quake could take itself out of Doom's shadow with a potential reboot is if id Software committed to taking the series in a more horror-themed route. The blueprints are there, the music, the scenery, the grotesque monsters, all feel like they belong to a horror game, and they don't have to go the full-blown survival horror route. But take Doom 3 for example. The core elements of that game are great in my opinion, and an updated version of that gameplay style with a Quake makeover would make people take Quake more seriously. My only major gripe with the game is the boss fights, if you can call them that. id Software have some pretty iconic bosses in the Doom series, like the Icon of Sin or the Cyber Demon. With all these gaming goats, surely Quake has to have a few. Nope. For some reason the bosses in Quake seem to be an afterthought by id Software. You fight the first one, well I say fight, you run around pressing buttons to shock it, and then it dies. This comes at the end of the first episode, and you'd think that this would be a sign from the game telling you that there will be a boss at the end of each episode, but that turns out not to be the case at all. This lava-looking geezer is the only boss you fight until the very end of the game, when you finally find out who's behind the demonic presence in all of these dimensions. Quake is actually revealed to be Shub. Can I say that? I think I'll just stick with Shub to be safe. This bitch is responsible for all of this cross-dimensional fuckery, and after getting all 4 runes, you make your way to her pit. This is where her true form is revealed. A big white tentacle hentai monster, and all of her most powerful thralls are there to stop you from defeating her. After getting through all of these guys, avoiding the traps, and falling into the lava pit so you have to do all that shit again and again, you finally come face to face with Shub. And how do you defeat her? Is it in an intense 1v1? No, even better, you teleport into her, which blows her up. Wow. Shub and the other boss I forget the name of feel like they were shoehorned into the game, because at that point, id Software were known for having bosses in their games. If they gave Quake another go, they could make some seriously great bosses to fit the gothic theme of the game. Shub was inspired by the work of H.P. Lovecraft, so just take some more ideas from that guy's messed up mind. Quake also has medieval ties, so id Software could give us a bone dragon boss, or a rabid unicorn. Despite Quake literally being a generation-defining FPS shooter, its core elements were overlooked simply because its multiplayer was too good. I think what really hurt this franchise though was the lack of clear vision from id Software themselves. Each sequel after the last jumped around, completely reshaping the franchise's identity. Oh, you liked the first game? Well, the second game has next to nothing to do with it. Oh, you liked the second game? Too bad the third game is an arena shooter. Oh, you loved the multiplayer of 3? Well, that's a shame, because 4 is a continuation of 2, and the multiplayer is shite. It feels like Quake was used as a way of throwing shit at a wall to see what sticks, which is a shame because the first Quake had the potential to give us so much more than what we got. A true sequel to Quake could have given us all kinds of different gothic dimensions, like a German expressionism dimension, maybe even a cybergoth dimension, or a dimension that's just based in Hot Topic. As far as I'm concerned, Ranger got robbed, but maybe, just maybe, id Software will finally decide to give the darker side of the series another go, or it might just backfire and completely sink Quake even deeper into obscurity.